The Green Bay Packers 2022 season definitely did not go as expected. The offense underperformed, the defense especially underperformed given the talent they have, and really the only unit that got better from 2021 to 2022 was the special teams. They finished with their first losing record since the 2018 season, their first losing record under Matt LaFleur, and they missed the playoffs in the last week in a final game where they had a chance to win that game and go into the playoffs. So considering the Green Bay Packers 2022 season is now officially over, it is time to start looking into the 2023 offseason and then of course into the 2023 season. So in this video, we're going to go over all 18 impending free agents for the Green Bay Packers in 2023. This list includes multiple starters with over 60% snap shares and some depth players as well as special teams players. And although it's early, currently the Green Bay Packers are sitting at $5.3 million over the cap, so negative $5.3 million, and that's without including the upcoming draft class, which then of course would drop it over $10 million over the cap. But the salary cap is for a whole other video, so if you want to see a video going over the salary cap implications for the Packers this offseason and what they can do to fix it, leave a like down below. So first on this list is Adrian Amos. Out of this entire list, he is the player on here with the most snap share with 94.6% of snaps. Amos, of course, signed that 4-year, $36 million contract in 2019 after leaving the Bears. So if we take a look at his current contract, you might be a little bit confused because you see it goes all the way till 2026. But mainly we're looking at 2022, which was last year, and he had a 7.2 cap hit. He's going to have a $7.9 million cap hit in 2023, even if the Packers don't re-sign him. So the Packers are going to be paying for him regardless. That's because during last year, when the Packers were extremely over the cap, they had to push out a lot of money into the futures, which is basically restructuring contracts. They did such with Adrian Amos, adding 4 void years, as we see here, and all that cap hit from those void years is placed on next year if he isn't on the team. So weirdly enough, the Green Bay Packers can actually save money on 2023 with an Adrian Amos extension. So it could cost less for 2023 for the Packers to sign Amos than for him to walk. I know it doesn't make too much sense, but from a salary cap standpoint, it does, considering all the void years. Now, Adrian Amos will be 30 years old before the season starts, so the Packers are going to have to decide, okay, if they do want to re-sign him at 30 years old, and then B, what that value would look like for a 30-year-old safety. Spot Track here has his calculated market value at an average annual salary of $6.8 million, which I think is pretty fair. Personally, I think right around that $6 million mark, I'd be happy with a 2-year extension for Adrian Amos. I do think the Packers need to bring him back. They're super thin at safety with Adrian Amos and Rudy Ford being free agents, and then Darnell Savage being on his 5th-year option. He did not have a good year at all. Outside of that, they are super thin. Next on this list is Allen Lazard, who had 78.9% of snaps in 2022, and I just released a video on him when he pretty much, I don't know if he exactly worded it correctly, but he pretty much said in this interview that he was done with the Green Bay Packers. I don't know if he just misworded some things there, but he didn't seem too happy the entire interview. He seemed very annoyed, and yes, it is right after a loss against the Lions where they kicked you out of the playoffs, so I understand that, but he is an impending free agent for 2023, and it really didn't sound like he'd be coming back. If you remember, during the offseason, Allen Lazard was a restricted free agent, so the Packers placed that 2nd-round tender on him, which included right around a $4 million cap hit, but it took Allen Lazard a very long time to sign that 2nd-round tender. I think this is, and this is all speculation, I think this is because Allen Lazard wanted a long-term deal, and the Packers just weren't going to give it, and Allen Lazard realized he has no other choice but to sign that tender, and then he eventually did. And this could also explain why he's annoyed and he said the things he said, and looks like he's not going to be back on the Packers in 2023. And I think for Allen Lazard, this is going to come down to money, simply money, and of course, if Allen Lazard wants to come back as well. Because I like Allen Lazard a lot. I think he gives a lot to this Packers offense, more than he would on another team in terms of blocking and all the dirty work he does at wide receiver. And I do think he's a good possession wide receiver, but I also think he underperformed in 2022, considering he was supposed to be that #1 wide receiver, and he didn't even total over 800 yards. And yes, Aaron Rodgers didn't have a good season either, and that definitely attributes to that. So it's definitely going to come down to money. And Spot Track has his contract evaluation at an average annual salary of $11 million. I am definitely not on board for this amount. If we look at one of the comparisons here, it's Corey Davis at $12.5 million average, and I believe Corey Davis is a much better wide receiver than Allen Lazard. Not to mention, Allen Lazard also did just turn 27, and likely if he were to be extended, he'd want a longer-term deal, like a 3-year deal, which would put him with the Green Bay Packers until he's 30 years old. So in my opinion, I don't think Allen Lazard will be back in 2023. I think another team around the NFL will be wide receiver needy and just throw money at him around $10 million, and that's not what the Packers are going to want to give for him. Next on this list, we have Josh Nijman. He totaled 69.1% of snaps, but the important thing about Josh Nijman is he still is a restricted free agent, so the Packers technically still have rights over him, and I see them definitely placing a second-round tender on him this offseason, the same one they placed on Allen Lazard, and that basically means a team can take him, but they would have to give the Packers a second-round draft choice, which I don't see any team in the NFL doing. That pretty much locks Josh Nijman up with the Green Bay Packers for 2023 for right around $4 million. I think this is a no-brainer. Nijman can play left tackle, can play right tackle, and overall it's just a good tackle to have as depth on your roster. Next is Jarran Reed, who had 68.2% of snaps in 2022. They signed him as a veteran addition last offseason, and I really liked the signing, and honestly, I think he did really well this year. It was a cheap signing, a one-year, $3.25 million deal with mainly incentives on that as well. So he's going to be 31 years old going into the season. I just feel it's kind of time for the Packers to start using their young defensive lineman talent more. Devontae Wyatt, TJ Slayton. We saw TJ Slayton, what he became later this year, a really, really solid player. Devontae Wyatt has always needed more snaps this year, in my opinion, so it might be time for them to finally move on to the younger talent, potentially draft another guy as well. But if he did want to come back as a veteran defensive lineman, a rotational guy, I wouldn't be mad at it, but it would have to be somewhere near vet minimum. Then we have Robert Tonyan. The Packers will call him a starting tight end with 54% of snaps, although the Packers use a lot of tight ends, Mercedes Lewis, Josiah DeGuara, Tyler Davis. And I also think this was a down year for Robert Tonyan. Although he had 53 receptions, which honestly, when I saw that, I was like, there's no way this dude did not have 53 receptions, but he did. Only 470 yards and 2 touchdowns. A big step down from what we saw in that 2020 season. And of course, he was coming back from a torn ACL, and I get that. Personally, I think the Packers need to go a totally different route with the tight end position. Now, I'll talk about Mercedes Lewis here in a little bit because he is a free agent. I do want him back. But I think they just need to either A, sign a free agent or draft an athletic tight end. They need something new in that tight end room that's going to be utilized in this Packers offense way, way more. And that's nothing against Robert Tonyan. I wouldn't mind him coming back, but it would have to be a pretty cheap deal considering he really underperformed in my eyes in 2022. Spotrac has his average annual salary market value at $5.1 million, which I think is too much for Robert Tonyan. I'm more around that $2 to $3 million mark. Maybe another 1-year prove-it deal for Tonyan, maybe with a lot of incentive bases. Then we have defensive lineman Dean Lowry, who was actually placed on IR late in the season, and in my opinion, I feel like when that happened, the defensive line got better, the run defense got better, and I think that's because TJ Slayton started to get more snaps, and he's a better run defender than Dean Lowry. Dean Lowry also has void years on his contract, just like Adrian Amos, so as we see here in 2023, even if the Packers don't re-sign him, they're going to be paying $3 million off their salary cap for Dean Lowry. And honestly, I think it's time to let go of Dean Lowry. He had a pretty good 2021, and he wasn't terrible in 2022. But like I said earlier with the whole Jarran Reed, I think they just got to start going with the young talent on defensive line, maybe draft another guy, maybe re-sign Jarran Reed as a veteran, depth guy, or sign a free agent, a different guy outside of Jarran Reed. But I think it's time to let go of Dean Lowry, even though you're going to be paying him $3 million, and if you were to re-sign him, you could possibly lower that a little bit. I don't really think it's worth it. I think it's time to move on. Next, we have Rudy Ford, who is a street free agent signing, another hidden gem by Brian Gutekunst, in my opinion. He played 42.8% of snaps, was mainly a special teams player his entire career, but I noticed when the Packers signed him, I looked into his stats from last year, and it looked like he started to get a lot more snaps at safety, and he actually did a good job. So when he signed with the Packers, I was thinking, okay, this guy can be more than just a special teams player, and he definitely proved that. Totaling 44 combined 9 tackles and 3 interceptions, and that's only in 6 games started, so that's pretty wild. Rudy Ford did just turn 28 years old, but I think the Packers definitely need to try to bring this guy back. I think he's definitely worth the money. Whatever he may ask, it obviously depends. But yeah, I'm on board with bringing Rudy Ford back, especially, like I said earlier, with Adrian Amos being a free agent, the Packers being thin at safety, Darnell Savage, who knows exactly what direction he will go in 2023. I think they need to bring Rudy Ford back, but I also see them drafting 1 or 2 safeties, especially one early in this upcoming draft, but I would like to see Rudy Ford back in that room as well. Next on this list is tight end big dog Marcedes Lewis. If Marcedes Lewis returns for his 18th season and doesn't retire, he will then break the record for tight ends for the most seasons played, and I definitely see him doing that. And I thought he still was playing at an extremely high level for this Packers offense in 2022, and I do want to see him back. He also has void years added on his deal here. The Packers will be paying him off the salary cap hit of $1 million, just over that in 2023, regardless of what he does. I do think they sign him to another 1-year deal, maybe right around the veteran minimum. Coincides with Aaron Rodgers possibly coming back for 1 more year, taking 1 more stab at it. He gets his record at tight end, and he still plays at a high level. He's a great blocker, and even late in the season last year, they started using him in the goal line situations, and it seemed like that worked really, really well. I want Marcedes Lewis back in 2023, so long Rodgers is coming back. The next player on this list was actually a surprise to me, and that's edge rusher Justin Hollins. When the Packers signed him, I didn't really know what to expect, but I didn't expect too much. I thought this guy would come in, probably not get that many snaps, and then end up being released in a few weeks. But that was definitely not the case. Justin Hollins ended up getting 40.7% of snaps, and of course that coincides with Rashawn Gary and his torn ACL, but when he was on the field, I thought he did really well and was a great rotational edge player. Hollins attributed for 9 total pressures and 3 quarterback sacks. And towards the end of the year, what really hurt the Packers defense was their edge rushing and their pass rush in general. They weren't really creating pressure. Obviously, without Rashawn Gary, that's going to be hard to do. And that definitely was the downfall of the defense in the Lions game as well. But I do want to see Justin Hollins back. I don't see him commanding that much money, and I think he'll be a good depth guy. I also see the Packers drafting an edge rusher pretty early, but having him in the room as well would help. The next player is pretty interesting, and that is wide receiver Randall Cobb. We saw at the end of the Lions game both Aaron Rodgers and Randall Cobb walking down the tunnel, basically arms over each other's shoulders, because that might have been the last time they have played together. And Rodgers went on record basically saying his decision may be impacted by the Packers retaining players such as Mason Crosby, Marcedes Lewis, and Randall Cobb. So personally, do not need Randall Cobb back in the building. Love what he gave to this organization. I love Randall Cobb as a player, as a person. I just don't really think the Packers need him in the wide receiver room anymore. He came in clutch a few situations last year, but he's definitely getting a lot older and doesn't have the same juice that he used to have. 32 years old. The Packers also have a void year in 2023 for him as well. They'll be paying off the cap almost $1.4 million for him, even if he's off the team, and I think he will be. I think Randall Cobb retires as a Packer this offseason, but if Rodgers were to play the same game he did 2 years ago and say, oh, I need Randall Cobb back, I need these guys back in order for me to come back, I guess under that pretense, bring him back, but I definitely don't agree with it. Then we have Mason Crosby, the Silver Fox, Money Mason. I mean, I think this dude can definitely come back. I think he still has some left in the tank, in my opinion. He has void years as well. He'll be $1 million salary cap hit in 2023, regardless if he's back or not. I think he can go for 1 more year. 38 years old. Now, the Packers could definitely bring in competition in the offseason, or even draft a guy or sign an undrafted free agent after the draft, which I'm okay with the competition, and if he beats out Mason Crosby, that's fine. But I still want Mason Crosby back in the building for 2023. He's shown he can still be consistent in cold weather and in clutch situations. The next one is a huge one, in my opinion, and that is none other than Keyshawn Nixon. Now, he's so low on this list because he didn't get that many snaps on defense, but even when he did, he also showed up on defense. So the main reason you want to re-sign this guy, obviously we know, is his special teams ability, his return ability. He was the best returner in the NFL last year, and I don't really think it was close. This dude totaled more return yards than anyone else, and he didn't return a kickoff until mid-October. It's absolutely insane how he transformed the special teams in this return game in general. The Packers need to re-sign Keyshawn Nixon. I honestly don't care what he wants. you should give him that money. He's 25 years old. He's shown what he can do for the special teams, which has been abysmal for the past like half decade. So you bring him back in the building, sign that check, get Keyshawn Nixon back for 2023 returning kicks. The next handful of players are going to go by pretty quickly as they're bottom of the roster guys. First of which we have tight end Tyler Davis. He is also a restricted free agent here. If they put a right of first refusal tender, which is the lowest one you could put on a restricted free agent, that's still a cap hit of $2.6 million. I don't think that's worth it for Tyler Davis. I think that experiment is over, and I'll eat crow on that because I talked Tyler Davis up last offseason saying this guy could potentially be the next breakout player on the Packers offense. It was definitely not that. The exact polar opposite. I don't know why they kept trying to force this guy into the offense over Josiah DeGuara, that he was an okay at best special teams player. I think, like I said, the Packers need to go in a complete different direction in tight end, and re-signing Tyler Davis is not the way to go. Then we have Chris Barnes. This one's an interesting one for me. He's also a restricted free agent, so again, you do the right of first refusal tender, the lowest one there at $2.6 million. And I normally would say, yeah, do this, but the emergence of Isaiah McDuffie and also the Packers pretty much leaving Chris Barnes as a healthy scratch for the majority of the last part of the season tells me that they're not going to re-sign him. Even though he's a restricted free agent, Isaiah McDuffie was getting snaps over him. And then even though Chris Barnes was healthy, he was on the injury report with a hand injury, but he was a full participant for like 4 weeks straight, so I never understood why he was still on there. And a lot of games he was inactive. And I don't think it was due to injury. I think it was due to him being, benched and Isaiah McDuffie getting snaps over him. So the fact that they have Devondre Campbell, Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie still on the roster, they probably won't retain him for that $2.6 million cap hit. Then we have center/guard Jake Hansen. Man, it felt like a long time ago that Jake Hansen was a starting guard week 1 for this Packers offense, and we all know how that went. He ended on IR for most of the season, and he's an exclusive rights free agent, so retaining him would only cost right around $900,000. I think the Packers do it just because it's depth on the offensive line. He has familiarity at multiple positions. I don't think he should be a starter, but he's an okay depth guy. Next on this list, we have linebacker Eric Wilson, and I think the Packers definitely need to re-sign him. He's an unrestricted free agent, and not for linebacker reasons, but for special teams reasons. If we go to PFF here and we sort it by special teams grade, Eric Wilson was tied for first in the entire NFL with a 91.7 PFF special teams grade. And he's tied with Yetur Gross-Matos, who has way less snaps than him. Eric Wilson has 195 total special team snaps, where Gross-Matos has 80. And Eric Wilson was probably the best coverage man for special teams in the entire NFL. So yeah, Keyshawn Nixon gets a lot of the limelight because of his return ability, but just as much, Eric Wilson was just as important for the special teams unit. The Packers definitely need to retain him. Next on this list is safety Dallin Leavitt. They kind of brought him in because of Rich Bisaccia. He had ties with him and on the Raiders team, and when he was a special teams coach there, and he was kind of brought in to be a special teams player, but Eric Wilson did way better than him. Dallin Leavitt wasn't really good at anything last year, and for a safety, you kind of want him to be able to at least play maybe a little bit of defense, but at the end of the year, they were even playing Ennis Gaines over him at the nickel corner or even a dime backer and all that. And Dallin Leavitt finished the year with a 57.2 PFF grade. Didn't work out. Probably shouldn't retain him. The last player on this list is cornerback Corey Ballentine. The Packers, I believe, signed him earlier in the year kind of as a backup return guy. This is when they still had Amari Rodgers returning punts and kicks. So he never really got to get that time to do that because obviously the emergence of Keyshawn Nixon, but he was also used as a gunner and he just wasn't really good at that either. A 52.9 special teams grade via PFF. You can get these type of players anytime, anywhere. No need to retain him this offseason. So yeah, that does it for all the free agents the Packers have for this upcoming offseason. It's going to be a very, very interesting offseason depending on what happens with Aaron Rodgers, and then of course how they're going to get under the salary cap, which again, there's a lot of ways they can do that. But then also with free agency here, what they're going to do, obviously it depends. If Aaron Rodgers comes back, they're going to try to go all in once again, try to keep as much talent as possible. But if Aaron Rodgers retires, they might start kind of transitioning into that rebuild phase, not pushing as much money out into the future like they did last year. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to be here all offseason, of course, going over everything Packers this offseason. Free agency, the draft, salary cap, you name it, you'll find it here right on this channel. So if you're new here, go down, click the subscribe button, leave a like on the video, and turn on post notifications. But I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching, and as always, go Pack Go.